when tolerance becomes a one-way street, it leads to cultural suicide. And that's where we are. Because if we are not willing to stand up and call a certain wrong a wrong, if we are not willing to stand up and identify and say who the enemy is, when we have a national security strategy that talks more about global warming than it does about Islamic extremism, Muslim terrorism, Islamic terrorism, when we are now talking about overseas contingency operations and man-caused disasters, something is wrong. We have become upside down. You know, when we don't want to say that there is a group of individuals out there that are the antithesis of who we are and what we stand for and what we believe in, but yet we want to continue to, you know, make our way of life subservient. We have a recalcitrance. We have a fear. We have something that is keeping us, holding us back from saying that there is nothing wrong with standing upon the Judeo-Christian faith heritage that we find in the United States, that we find in Israel, we find all across Western civilization. We have got to recognize who the enemy is. Because my fear is that right now we are standing in some 1930s Sir Neville Chamberlain moment where we really do believe that we can compromise and negotiate and we can appease people who mean to kill you and harm you. And when I sit back and I hear so often everyone talks about, well, it's just the Taliban or it's just Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's such a narrow focus. That would be just the same as if, you know, the United States of America went to war and said, we're only going to go fight the 2nd platoon of Charlie Company of the enemy. Nations have to understand and recognize what is it that is fueling the enemy that we are finding ourselves against. What are their goals and objectives? See, before Al-Qaeda came along, the #1 terrorist group that had killed more Americans was Hezbollah. And so we can't stop recognizing them. Or we can't recognize the fact that we are sending money into Gaza Strip, and Gaza Strip is controlled by a known terrorist organization, which is Hamas. You know, we made a very terrible mistake. You know, the Shah of Iran may not have been the most perfect of gentlemen. But when we did not support the Shah of Iran and we allowed the Ayatollah Khomeini to take over power, what we did, we created the problems that we see right now. We created the resurgence of a radical Islamic totalitarianism, which is imperialistic in nature and its design. And we've got to understand that. We've got to understand that, true enough, we don't need to sit here and say it's every Muslim. But there is a core group of individuals that if we're not careful, they can easily destroy this country. I had an interview last week with a gentleman from the London Daily Telegraph, and he said, well, don't you think that you're giving them too much credit, you're giving them too much, you know, props or something like that? And I said, very simple, and let me talk to you about some numbers. 19 people killed 3,000 people on 9/11. One person killed 13 American soldiers and wounded another 30. One person, if it had not have been caught, could have killed countless amounts of individuals in Portland, Oregon at a Christmas celebration. See, those are the odds. And so I'm not going to discount the onesies or the twosies, because those are truly the numbers that can still affect things. You look at what just recently happened in Iraq with the car bombing there. We don't need to talk about what happened in Netanya. We don't need to talk about what happens in Sedrot. And if I didn't pronounce that right, remember, I am from Georgia, so I do have this accent thing. But when I go there and I see the young children who are shell-shocked, when I see the playgrounds, they have bomb shelters next to it. Why? Why is that happening? And that story is not getting out. See, after you recognize the enemy, another thing that we need to do, we have to win this information operations war. Because when that whole Gaza flotilla tape came out, I was sitting there with my wife and I said, Angela, those guys have paintball guns strapped to their backs. But no one really understood that they had to use their personal sidearms to defend themselves. We are giving the enemy every advantage, every opportunity we can. Just the same as in Iraq and Afghanistan with our soldiers, the rules of engagement that we have created gives the enemy the initiative over our soldiers. So we have got to once again get out there and put our message out. Put our message out that says we stand for freedom. Put our message out that says it is not us who are killing just as many Muslims as are the terrorists. It is not us who are going into schools and decapitating headmasters. It is not us who are going up to girls' schools and throwing acid on young girls or gunning them down. It is not us that are shooting rockets and missiles from land that we continue to cede over in the hopes of peace. Ladies and gentlemen, the time is coming where we must all stand upon a conviction. Because as my mom said, a man must stand for something or else he'll fall for anything. And right now we're falling. We're falling to the point where what happens when that whole thing about mutually assured destruction theory goes out the window? That's what we operated with the Soviet Union, but that's not going to be a viable alternative or solution if Iran gets a nuclear device. When Mahmoud Ahmadinejad goes into Lebanon, he faces toward Israel and says, we stand for the destruction of the Zionist state. What more do you need? What more evidence do you need? There comes a time when, if someone continues to poke you in the chest, you must understand that you have to take that serious. It reminds me of when Theo van Gogh, who was a Dutch filmmaker, was heard saying, as he was being stabbed repeatedly to death, to his assailant, can't we just talk about this? Now, I don't know about you, but when someone's driving a knife into my chest, I think the whole course of action of let's having an intellectual discourse is over. But yet, on a grander scale, that's what we're allowing to happen. You look all across Europe, the anti-Semitism that is happening there. You look at what's going on in London. There's a YouTube video where we see rioting Islamists chasing away the British police. Malmö, Sweden, what was once a thriving Jewish community there, I believe has dwindled down to about 500. People afraid to walk around with their yarmulkes. People afraid to walk around and profess their Jewish faith in Europe. This is where we are in our country. And if you go back and you study history for the Jewish people, you were driven out of your homeland. You were driven off the Arabian Peninsula. You were driven because of the horrors of the Inquisition out of Spain. You were driven out of Eastern Europe. You withstood the Holocaust. We finally said that we would return the Jewish people back to their homeland. And immediately, after May of 1948, you were attacked. When does the time come when we say, enough is enough? It's very simple. Where do you go after Israel? Do you come to the United States of America? Because the clock is ticking here just as well. And that is the challenge that we have. We can sit around and we can talk about all the things with our economic situation. And we can fix our economic situation. We can get Americans back to work. That's not an issue. But even once we recreate economic prosperity in this country, all the great technological advancements, all the biotech advancements, all the beauty that you see in Israel, if you can't have safety, if you can't identify your enemy, if you can't stand up to that threat, then it's all for naught. If you're held hostage within your own boundaries, it's all for naught. So in accepting this award, I tell you one simple thing. It is my duty to stand up to defend Israel.